Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, I suppose it's our first session in this program, and I have been asked to interact on changing contours of professional education and role of teacher. If we have to talk about the changing contours of professional education, I think so we need to really go in history of development of technical education in our country, and then what were the major milestone as to how we have achieved the present status, what exactly is the present status, so what exactly is the intensity of variety of courses in India, and then of course we'll be discussing something about the role of teacher in this changing scenario. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I already stand introduced, and I've been with TTTI for about 35 years. Prior to that, I worked in a public sector consulting organization for little more than 5 years. I also had the experience of working in industry for a year. I had special interest in education, training, and rehabilitation of person with disability. Of course, Dr. Sunidhi has already told you. For about 13 years, I was associated with rural development department. Otherwise, by and large, I have been a teacher of entrepreneurship and small business management. Okay, so that's my background. This institute, in fact, I joined as associate assistant professor, which is now associate professor, way back in 1984. Then became professor, and in between, I had 3 years term as dean, and when I retired, I was heading entrepreneurship development and industrial coordination department. And being in an institute like National Institute of Technical Teacher Training and Research, one has to be necessarily associated with large number of committees, whether they are constituted by AICT or UGC or some other organizations. So from that point of view, I had fairly good interaction at higher level, and so far as some of the centrally sponsored schemes are concerned, so I was quite deeply associated with at least two of the schemes. One was community development through Polytechnic, which I was spearheading for about 15 years. And the other one was a scheme basically for persons with disability. It was known as Integrating Person with Disability in Technical and Vocational Education. And in fact, ever since the scheme started until my retirement, so I was associated with that scheme also. So in case you have any questions pertaining to these two schemes, you can also ask those questions. Okay, now let's get started and get going. Now, as I told you, I would like to give you a little bit about the history of technical and professional education in India. And I would say the history of technical education in India is not really more than 150, 170 years, not more than 170 years old. And to start with, whatever technical institutes came up in our country, so by and large, those institutions, they had come basically with a view to meet the requirement of military and defense forces. So the very first institution which was established in our country was industrial school, which was basically. So I was just taking you towards the early days of this thing, professional and technical education development in India. Industrial school attached to ordnance factories. So a school existed in Calcutta and also in Bombay, and these schools were established in 1825, exactly 199 years ago. Okay. Then thereafter, industrial school was established in Gindi. Gindi, is a place. I think so. It's in Tamil Nadu near Chennai. Okay. So it's in Chennai, and Gindi school was established in Madras in 1842. So after a gap of about 17 years, prior to that we had the other two industrial school, and it was attached to the gun factory. As I told you, basic idea was to meet the requirement of army and defense forces. So this school was attached to the this thing, gun carriage factory at Madras. Then some more development took place, and school for training of overseers, it was established in 1954, and it was established at Pune. Okay. Then thereafter, the first engineering college, which was first engineering college for training of civil engineers, that was established at Roorkee in 1847, and this college was named as Thomas Engineering College. Thomas Engineering College at IIT at Roorkee was earlier there was a different name, and now it is upgraded as IIT. Okay, so Thomas Engineering College was established, and three colleges were established in India during 1956. These colleges included this thing, Calcutta College of Civil Engineering, and there's a famous building known as Writers Building in Calcutta. So this college was located in Writers Building, and later on this college was renamed as Bengal Engineering College. That again is a very prestigious institute, Bengal Engineering College, and the college was affiliated to Calcutta University. Thereafter, later on, this college was shifted to, there's a place called Shivpur, and it was renamed as Bishop College. Okay. Then Gandhi College of Engineering, affiliated to Madras University, was established in 1858. Then three more colleges, they started offering licentiate courses in civil engineering. They were not, named as either diploma or degree or PG program. They were basically the licentiate courses in the area of civil engineering. Then came this thing, Victoria Jubilee Technical Institute. It was started in 1887. And there again, the licentiate courses in three different disciplines, which included basically the mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and textile engineering. And textile again, because mechanical, electrical, and textile, all three distinct branches of engineering basically associated with basic requirement of humanity. So that's why these three licentiate courses, they got started in 1887. Then College of Engineering and Technology at Jadavpur started offering diploma. Now the development took place from licentiate courses. Then we graduated to diploma courses. So we took more initiative, and diploma courses started getting offered at Jadavpur. And these diploma courses were basically in the area of mechanical engineering in 1908, and chemical engineering course was started in 1921. So even till 1921, we had very few institutions offering such like technical programs. Okay, thereafter, in fact, that was the time, the freedom struggle was going on in our country, and there were people who were talking about developing India, both industrially as well as economically. And somehow the British mindset set at that time was, even if there are some enterprises which are coming up here in India, the main jobs, officer cadre job, they should be performed by Britishers, and it's only the lower level jobs, maybe at the maximum supervisory or some lower cadre craftsmanship related job, they should be given to the Indians. And by and large, their thinking was the engineers, they need to be brought from British, and other of course labor class, these people, they should be from Indian origin. But at that time, a debate started in India in 1915. There was Indian Industrial Commission, which got constituted, and they started developing the technical education base in India. And they started thinking in terms of starting degree courses in engineering in India itself, so that bright Indian people, they can get into engineering discipline, and they can, occupy senior positions in government and different industries, etc. Then thereafter, almost at that very time, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya ji, he succeeded in starting this thing, degree program in engineering, and basically three degree program. One was in the area of mechanical engineering, then electrical engineering, and the third discipline was metallurgy. So these three degree program got started at Banaras Hindu University. So on establishment of Banaras Hindu University, these three courses started, and as we all are fully aware of now, BHU again is now renamed as IIT BHU. it's known as IIT BHU. Similarly, Roorkee name has also been changed. Okay. So what happened? Bengal Engineering College at Shibpur started offering this thing, mechanical and electrical engineering courses, and of course, simultaneously, the other college, this thing, BHU also started offering. Almost the same time, the above courses were started at Pune and Gindi also. And on attaining independence, then in 1947, as we all are aware, India got became independent, and on attaining independence, the immediate need was to strengthen the education base, and within the education base, of course, university education and technical professional education. So that was to be strengthened. So on attaining independence in 1947, India realized the need for starting a large number of engineering colleges so as to become industrially developed country. So we didn't have much of industry at the time of independence. So then organized efforts started for development of engineering education, and of course, I think so it was in 1945 or so, even the idea of establishing All India Council of Technical Education was conceived. Of course, this thing AICT Act, of course, was passed in 1980s, 85 or so. So the courses which were thought of under technical education, technical and professional education. So basically, 8 different type of courses they were considered, and even now, if you talk about different type of courses which get covered under or which fall within the scope of AICT, as you know, AICT is the apex body which this thing controls the technical education in India, which regulates technical education in India. So basically, engineering, technology, management, architecture, town and country planning, pharmacy, applied art and crafts, and hotel management and catering. In fact, even now, these are the 8 streams which are basically covered by this thing. They are under the mandate of AICTE. Let's devote a little time on what exactly were the objective of developing technical education at that time. So the idea was we should have trained skilled manpower for the country. We should have adequate trained manpower for the country so as to meet our own manpower requirement, whether they are from industry or from government or from social sector. Then enhancing industrial productivity of the manpower. We all are aware of this thing. Trained people definitely would enjoy better productivity. They'll have better productivity. They'll give more production. So naturally, their efficiency would be better. So enhancing industrial productivity of the manpower of Indian origin, that was another objective. And then improving quality of life of the people. As you know, when we got independence, so at that time we were basically an agrarian society, and in 1947, if I talk about, that was the time when almost 80-85% people, they were living in rural areas. By and large, people were dependent on agriculture and allied activities. And if you link it with the GDP of the country, you see at that time almost 50% GDP, wherein almost 80% people were working. So that was coming from agriculture and allied activities. And hardly 28 to 30% GDP, gross domestic product, that was being contributed by the service sector, and remaining around 20% from factory sector and allied this thing sector. That's what was the these were the 3 major constituent of GDP at that time. Now, see the kind of changes which have taken place. If you talk about India's GDP at present, let's not get into this thing. How big is the Indian economy? Probably you would be aware of. We are, in terms of, this thing, quantity, India's GDP at present is 3.95 US billion, this thing, billion dollar. Okay. A trillion, 3.95 trillion US dollar. That's the size of Indian economy. And if you compare it with other countries, so we are the 5th largest economy now. Above us, we have America, we have China, we have Germany, we have Japan. And Japan and Germany, they have, their GDP somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 trillion US dollar. India already at 3.95. So the maybe in next 2 to 3 years, we might even cross Germany and Japan, and India might become the third largest economy in terms of GDP. Of course, taking over China and America. So that doesn't seem to be happening in short run. It may take many decades, but we can definitely overcome Germany and Japan. Now, I was just trying to tell you what are the kind of changes which have taken place in terms of GDP. See, 1947, 50% GDP, which was being contributed by agriculture and allied sector. If you talk of today, so the contribution of agriculture and allied sector has come down from 50% to 13% now. 50% to 13%. That doesn't mean that agriculture and allied sectors contribution has come down. In fact, it's only in terms of percentage. Otherwise, in terms of absolute number, so our agriculture production would have been almost 10 times more than what we had at the time of independence. Okay, but it basically shows the other sector other than primary, secondary, and tertiary sector, they have progressed more than the agriculture sector. This is what indicates. So 13 to 14% contribution coming from agriculture and allied sector, and 60 to 62% contribution coming from service sector, which is also known as this tertiary sector. Okay, so 60 to 62%, which is a huge increase. So from 28-30% to almost 60 to 62%, huge expansion of service sector. In fact, some of the policy formulators, they feel Indian service sector has expanded a lot, rather expanded too fast. Okay, so far as industrial sector is concerned, so remaining contribution, which may be around 20% or so, that's coming from industry and allied sector. Now here, one thing very interesting I want to share with you. In India, we have seen economy is growing a lot. We are aiming to become the third largest economy, but particularly post-liberalization, if you look at, so post-liberalization period, unfortunately, poor people are becoming poorer and rich people are becoming richer. Okay, so just to give you a little insight into it, why is it happening so? You see, if you look to almost 60% contribution by the service sector, this 60% contribution is being made by almost 27 to 28% of the working class people. In India, out of 142 crore, that's our population now, almost 98 crore people are the working people, male, female taken together. So 27% of that, 27% people contributing almost 60%. Now 55% people are still dependent upon agriculture and allied. And unfortunately, these 55% people, they happen to be contributing only 13%. So 13% divided by 55, it's not even 1/4. Okay, less than that, maybe 0.23 or 224. On the other hand, if you divide 60% by 27%, that's more than 2. Value, you'll get more than 2. And if you look to the factory sector, so factory sector and allied activity, which contribute around remaining 23-24% of the total GDP, that's being contributed by 17% of the working class. So 17% people engaged in factories and allied activity, 55% people in agriculture, that's 72, and remaining 28% in service sector. Now these figures, if you divide the total contribution by the percentage population working in different sector, then you can easily relate it with, you can easily find out the productivity of people working in these different sectors. And here, the simple mathematics, 60 divided by 28 more than 2, and 24%, 24 divided by 17, little more than 1.5 or so, and 13% divided by 55, almost 1/4%. So that basically goes on proving why is it the poor are becoming poorer and rich are becoming richer. Okay? We also have a strong middle class in India. So that strong middle class is because by and large people are quite a large number of people, sizable number of people, they are in service sector and factory sector. So they are the one who really constitute strong middle class in India. Okay. So now government of India and our policy formulator fully aware, even our bureaucrat, they are fully aware of that agriculture sector is one sector which suffers from very poor productivity, and agriculture sector is in terms of manpower, if you talk about, so there's definitely surplus manpower in agriculture sector, and government now realizes unless we take out some people from service sector and induct them in other sectors of economy, so this problem of poor becoming poorer and rich becoming richer, that will continue. So some people need to be withdrawn from there, but unfortunately people who are engaged in agriculture and allied activity. They are not trained for anything other than the agriculture, and they find it very difficult to get adjusted in other sectors. Anyway, this was something to do with the overall economics of the country. That's not our topic. Our topic is basically, changing contours of professional education in India. So I have given you little bit about the background as to how the technical base started developing, and immediately after independence, a lot of massive investment had gone into development of professional education. Then it kept on happening for about 30 to 40 years, and it was way back in 1992. In 1992, when the country opted for liberalization, privatization, and globalization, the floodgates were opened and private investment started coming even in education sector. Otherwise, prior to that, education was something which was considered to be the domain of government, and almost 80% education facilities, they were created by central and state government. Private investment would have had control on or 20% of the seats. But if you talk of today, the ratio has just reversed. Now 80% education, whether it is school education or your university or technical, professional. So in totality, almost 80% education now belongs to private sector, and it's only 20% which is in the hand of the government. So ratio has just changed. And look to the kind of look to the kind of massive investment. What is it has really resulted in? Today, if you talk of national scenario of higher technical institution in India, so at present we have 23 IITs, which include 16 old IITs and 7 IITs are being established now. Then we have IIMs. To start with, way back in 1957-58, we had only Ahmedabad, Bangalore, and Calcutta. There used to be only 3 IIMs. But in first decade of 21st century, large number of IIMs have been established. And if you talk of today, we have first generation IIM. To start with, we had 3. Thereafter, Indore and Calicut were added. Then some more got added, and now almost every state has got its own Indian Institute of Management. At least all major states, they have their own Indian Institutes of Management. And there's only one state, and that's the state of Maharashtra. Maharashtra has got 2 IIM. One is in Nagpur, I suppose, and the other one, there used to be institute called NITI at Bombay. So that has also been converted into IIM, and as such, the Maharashtra state has got 2 IIMs now. So 21 IIMs, which include 7 first generation, and remaining, they are the new generation. Second generation are 6, and 8 they are in different phases. Then earlier we used to have only one Indian Institute of Science, which was at Bangalore. Now we have, in addition to IISc at Bangalore, we have 7 IISER, Indian Institute of Science Education and Research. One of them is at Mohali in Punjab. Okay. Then the movement started, I think so, basically it started in 1980s and 1990s. Okay. Indian Institute of Information Technology started getting established, and at present we have 26 triple ITs. 26 triple ITs, which include, out of 26, 5 are Institute of National Importance, and remaining 21, they are established in public-private mode. NITs. When country got independence, thereafter we established regional engineering colleges. Regional engineering colleges, they were upgraded and they were given the status of National Institute of Technology when BJP government came in power in 1999 or so. And thereafter, again, a decision was taken to take NITs to almost every state and union territory. And as a result of that policy, right now we have 31 NIT. Almost, you can say, almost every state has got one NIT. Leaving aside some small states and union territories, almost every state will have one NIT. Then there are other institutes like Institute of School of Planning and Architecture, then Indian School of Mine University. We have NARIST, Northeastern Regional Institute of Science and Technology, which is at Itanagar. Similar institute exists in Punjab, which is known as SLITE, Sant Longwal Institute of Engineering and Technology. NIF and CIT. NIF basically stands for National Institute of Foundry and Forging Technology, and Central Institute of Technology. Then there are 171 Institute of National Importance, and these Institute of National Importance, they are basically established under the Act of Parliament, and the institute include this number. There may be some little difference, minor difference in totaling if you do that. So 171 Institute of National Importance include 23 IITs, 21 IIMs, 31 NRITs, 7 IISERs, and of course I suppose IISc should also be there. Then you have 7 NIPERs, National Institute of Pharmacy Education and Research, then 25 triple ITs, then 7 NIDs, School of Planning and Architecture, then NIFM, National Institute of Footwear Technology, then 10. There are 54 central university out of 10 falling under the category of NIT, Institute of National Importance, and there are 13 other specialized institutes. So this is the kind of network. I am only talking of this thing. If you talk of Indian technical education, maybe you can say there are certain centers of excellence, and these are nothing but centers of excellence so far as technical and professional education is concerned, whether it is engineering, medicine, science, technology. Okay, then there would second level of institution, state-run institution, state-run colleges. So you can these institutions which are shown here under A category, then there would be B category institution, then of course C category institution which are not doing so well and they are just struggling to survive. Just to give you a little idea about this figure need to be updated. Of course, the present data belongs to 2018-19, so this need to be updated. But just to give you a little idea about how professional education in our country is managed, AICT for that matter, which happens to be regulator for technical education in our country, they have divided the entire country in 8 regions, which include Central Region, Western Region, Southern, Northwestern, Southwestern, Eastern, and Northern. These are the 8. And the spread of this thing colleges at degree level, PG level, and diploma level, all shown here. Approved intake is also shown. Just to give you a little idea about how big is the technical education system in India. And in totality, if you see, there are almost 4,800 diploma level institutions, 5,272 PG institutions, and 44 to 6. These are undergraduate institutions. Diploma level intake is of the order of almost 12 lakh, and if you talk of PG level, we have a capacity of admitting almost 6,71,000. Then undergraduate level more than 15 lakh, and all taken together, so the total works out to almost 33.90 lakh. Huge capacity. Some small countries like Singapore, maybe their population itself is little, maybe less. Or so look to the size of this thing, higher education in India. So it's a huge system. Just to give you a little idea about the total education system in India, we have 15 lakh plus schools in India, and 15 lakh plus schools, they admit almost 26 crore students, and there are almost around 4 crore students in Indian higher education. So 26 plus 4, 30 crore people studying in education itself. So there are very few countries. America is one, maybe Malaysia or one or two more countries who have population more than 30 crore. Otherwise, you compare the Indian technical education, it's bigger than the total population of. So that's the vastness of Indian population, and in this vastness, you will find there are certain pocket of excellence, there are certain average kind of institutions, there are C grade institutions where nobody wants to seek admission. Now, what are the strengths of higher technical education system? It's one of the largest system in the world, largest stock of educated manpower, and that's what has resulted in self-reliance in this thing, manpower. And now we are at a stage where we can even think of exporting. You talk of managerial manpower, engineering manpower, other professional diploma level people, or even craftsmen. So because of the vastness of the system which we have in our country, we are in a position to export huge number of people to other countries wherever their services. So for that matter, you do find Indians working almost in every other country. Then democratization and improvement in equity. Now, there was a time when education used to be considered only the domain of some rich people, but now even poorer state of society, they can also participate in that. Then there are pocket of excellence which I have shared with you. After all our IITs, IIMs, NITs, some institution like even PEC at Chandigarh, some university, they can rightfully be claimed as pockets of excellence, and they are comparable with this thing. Institutions abroad or IIT or IIMs, even American, they know it fully well. They admit this thing. Getting into any of the IIT, getting into any of the IIM in India, very, very difficult. Not that easy, because it's not that easy. They attract real good talent, and this talent is then further polished, and the talent which really comes out of these institutions, they tend to all over the world. So there are pockets of excellence. There is definitely diversity. If you look to the total number of this thing courses being offered, there would be quite a few hundred. I would suggest you to lay your hands on a report called SHE, Survey of Higher Education in India, as Survey of Higher Education, SHE report. SHE report is published of education every year. If you lay your hands on, you just browse through, you'll then understand this thing, vastness of Indian education system. You find out capacity available at different level. It will give you student, total number of teacher, total number of school, school, colleges, institutions, etc. So all these details you'll find. And you'll find there's a lot of diversity. Socio-economic development, freedom, and then democracy and political stability in the country has really resulted in much better education system. Some of the part of so these weaknesses, etc. I'll share this presentation with you. You can on your own go through. The growth has not been adequate. Till some area we feel we need to have more growth. Of course, inequality in higher education. You do find this thing. There are regional inequality, interstate inequality and disparities, and rural-urban divide. In some area, you talk of some of the northeastern states and maybe Bihar, Odisha, and also where you find the education level is not that as high as compared to state like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra, etc. Inequalities between social groups, particularly if you try to analyze it, caste, religion, and gender, there again you would find there are certain inequalities, and inequality between the economic groups. Naturally, people who are not economically that strong, many a time they tend to lag behind. Then these are some of the recent trends. Quickly we can rush through. Reduced level of public funding. So public funding, unfortunately, in education system in terms of percentage, that's reducing. Increased level of cost recovery. What we find is usually government, by and large, even in government issues and government, you should try to supplement your resources. You should try to have your own IRG, and government grants are getting reduced. Government expect you try to recover whatever cost you are incurring. That's why you find many self-financing courses being run in different issues. Non-recruitment of teacher, of course, is a countrywide problem, and you do find whether they are IIT, IIMs, or AIMS, technical institution, or science education institution, or medical institution, there are large number of vacancies. So on an average, almost 30 to 35% vacancies exist in most of the higher technical institutions, and also say almost similar problem exists even in school education system. So non-recruitment of teacher, another problem with this thing is sometimes paper leaks, sometimes some other problem, and you do find recruitment of faculty is a real challenge. In fact, for that matter, any government department, what you find is the recruitment of people and purchases are two difficult areas, and you may be totally this thing, you may have any kind of transparency, but still people would doubt you have done something wrong. Okay, that's what happens, and that's why some people do not really want to be associated with recruitment and purchases this government system. There are many private colleges and deemed university which are coming up now. I have already shared with you almost 80% education now belongs to private sector. Then growth of private institutions, increase in for-profit institution that's taking place. Of course, education is considered to be no profit sort of venture, but increase in profit institutions of higher education was vulgar form of commercialization, more privatization than any other countries. What we find is some of the institutions maybe okay, they may have good infrastructure, but even some of the non-technical institutions, you find them charging millions and millions of rupees as fee every year. I don't know to what extent it is really justified. There has been some decline in philanthropy. Philanthropy basically, giving donation to educational institution. Otherwise, when Indian Institute of Science was established at Bangalore, the entire amount at that time was contributed by Tata. It's a huge investment. So now some of the industrialists, they do make a lot of profit, but the kind of philanthropy which exists in many other developed countries, unfortunately, that level of philanthropy doesn't exist in India. And right now, if you talk about, I think so, it's Azim Premji who is contributing the maximum to the education system. And probably some of the industrialists, they have, they have started considering education as yet another business opportunity, and those who can, they have already established their own universities, own institutions. Corporatization of university has been done. If you look to the kind of designations which are given to academicians, corporate kind of structure, you do find president, vice president, and director, etc. Corporatization of university system is taking place. Then international trade in higher education is also picking up. So good foreign institutions coming to India and good Indian institutions going abroad. That also has started happening. Our IIT, IIM. So they have started establishing campuses abroad. IIT Madras has gone abroad. IIM Lucknow has established center elsewhere. Even some of the private players like BITS Pilani, they have already gone abroad. So international trade in higher education, that is now picking up. Growth of some discipline and neglect of others. Again, some of the, there are certain sectors which do not really get you job, and those sectors. You see, purpose of education need to be understood a little different. Purpose of education is not simply preparing people for getting jobs. So purpose of education is somewhat different, and there may be some discipline which do not which can't be measured really in terms of what are the economic benefit of this thing, and those discipline maybe they are neglected to some extent. Emphasis on open learning system is now taking place. Overall neglect of higher education system and new plans for expansion are definitely taking place. So let's forget about this thing, steep increase in fee structure and all that's happening. Student loan, of course, earlier we used to have a lot of this thing, scholarship. Now government, the shift is from they try to give more of loan rather than giving so much of scholarship. So those who can make this thing getting loan easy for the student, and rather than distributing this thing scholarship, and ultimately the loan has to be refunded to the government. But loan again, I would say okay, providing loan facility is one, but then there again probably the principle of equity is compromised to some extent. So when any bank gives loan, so they are basically looking at repayment. They don't really consider the economic status as such. Okay, and poorer people, they may not be in a position to negotiate the required amount of loan so easily. Further increase in fee, then restructuring excess, etc. I think we can leave this thing, privatization of higher education. I'll go to the relevant section. So in nutshell, if you try to summarize this thing, you'll find higher education pass outs considered to be good. In fact, we keep on hearing this thing from the captains of industry and professional organizations like CII, PHDCCI, then SHM and FICCI, etc. So their president, time and again, they keep on expressing their concern about this thing, pass out from different institutions not being employable. They do find this thing, curriculum in these most of the institution is outdated, and there's little interaction between academia and world of work. So there's not much of industry institute interface taking place, and naturally if the industry institute interface is taking place, then student would be more job ready. Yet another problem with this thing, Indian system, what you find is almost 90% student, they want to get admission in 10% of the top ranking institution. This is a sort of imbalance. In fact, if you look to the school education system, most of the parents, what I find is most of the parents, they want their words to be in good private school. But when it comes to higher education in India, so most of the parents, they want their sons and daughter to be in, it's a total contradiction, something different at school level and something totally different at higher education level. In higher education, again, almost 90%, as I told you, you can put maybe 10% institution in A category, maybe 40 to 50% in B category, and remaining almost 50% in C category. So nobody wants to get admission in B and C category. Everybody wants to get admission in A category institution. That's why almost 90% students, they want to get admission in 10% of the top ranking institution. That's why so much of say this thing and these coaching school, etc., they are all flourishing. Then there's unchecked institution. In fact, we have seen this thing happening in this thing, early part of say this thing, early first decade of 21st century. So mushrooming of technical institutions took place, and thereafter when we got into overcapacity, and thereafter the institutions, because there were surplus institutions, surplus seats created, then people started even closing the institutions. Corporatization and commodification of higher education. People have now started considering education as yet another commodity. Commodification of education, and some people, they think, well, education is something degrees can be bought, or you spend money, you can get a degree. So that's what has happened. Then inadequate faculty and infrastructure. So far as government institutions are concerned, I would say there are adequate faculty and adequate infrastructure. But now, as I have already shared with you, almost 80% education falling in private sector, and most of the private institutions, particularly those who do not attract adequate number of students, they definitely suffer from this thing, problem of poor infrastructure. Then recognition of Indian qualification abroad. So you see the institution which have good infrastructure, good faculty and good resources, and those who have already gone either for NAC accreditation or NBA accreditation, when pass out from those institutions, they go abroad, so their qualifications are recognized. Otherwise, those who could not NBA accreditation for their courses or NAC accreditation for their institution, so pass out from those institutions, particularly when they go abroad, they definitely suffer. And there's a problem of equivalence or recognition of Indian qualifications abroad. With a view to sort out this problem, the Washington Accord has already taken place. I think so it was signed in 2013 or so, and thereafter NBA trying to reach to different different institutions, and NBA accreditation awareness was created, and most of the courses they are now expected to go for NBA accreditation. Not many engineers they really for doctoral program. As you compare, if you compare Indian education system to education system abroad in developed country, many engineers they would enroll for doctoral program and postdoctoral program. But in India, so having done engineering, one wants to carve out a career either in corporate or in government or elsewhere, and very few people they go for PhD program. Then poor research and development, not many patent filed. Again, it's a comparison with other country. Now, of course, patenting in many institutions is really picking up. Then vast majority of teachers are poorly paid. Here again, I would like to say that so far as government system is concerned, teachers are now fairly well paid, and they also have plenty of opportunity to earn by way of consultancy, by way of providing testing services. But so far as private institutions are concerned, so I would say teachers are poorly paid and their pay scales are not at all comparable with. Higher education system is unaffordable for students from economically weaker section of society. Earlier also we talked about that. Then National Skill Qualification Framework and Indian higher education system. In fact, government expect NSQF courses to be aligned with NSQF levels, and not many institutions are really coming forward. And now again, some work with regard to NSQF equivalence of courses it had started, but then came the Education Policy 2020, and now again one has to really reorient NSQF and as to how NSQF is going to be equated or integrated in new education policy. This is something which is yet to be experienced. Community colleges and higher education system. This community college concept, which is a little more popular in southern states, but much popular in countries like Canada and America. So Indian government tried to implement the concept of community colleges, but again it has not been a success in India. Then National Institutional Ranking Framework has been developed, and now for every institution is expected like get that NIRF rank, and many good institutions would also make it a selling point if they get a good score. Then NBA accredited courses in technical institution, I would say even though government expects all institutions to go for NBA accreditation despite their best efforts, so all courses are not yet NBA accredited. Same is problem with NAAC accreditation of the institution. Hardly 50% institution would be NAAC accredited, and implementation of RUSA of course is taking place. Use of MOOCs in teaching learning also, this is yet another facility which is now extended, and a large number of massive open source courses they have been prepared by talented faculty from different educational institutions. These resources are available, but much depends upon to what extent students and teacher community really make use of that. Implementation of academic bank of credit across the country would definitely be required, particularly when we implement new education policy. So let's proceed further. Some people also talk about this thing, education 4.0, industry 4.0 and all. So in terms of education 4.0, remember this thing. When you have forgotten what you studied for your exam, what really helps you in getting through that exam or what remains is the real education. And with regard to education, it's very important quote. It says, education need to prepare students for employment, entrepreneurship, and above all, for carrying out research in areas which do not exist. You see, a student who is in college, maybe somewhere in the age of 20 to 25 years of age, okay, and now it's very difficult to predict what is it this student would be doing, say, mid-career. Mid-career would be if you join at, say, 25 years, so in your 40s, when you are in 40s, what sort of career or what sort of problem you would be solving, what sort of, this position you would be holding. So it's very, very difficult because the world is changing and because of these fast changes which are taking place, so we have to basically provide such an education to our students. They are capable of undertaking research in areas that do not exist. So that means some sort of self-learning has to keep on taking place, and these people, they should be open to learning, self-learning, self-study, and from time to time they should involve themselves in research areas, new emerging research areas which do not exist now. Then secondly, using technologies that have not been invented. Challenge for today's youth is they will have to make use of technologies which right now do not exist. Like few years ago, probably nobody heard of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so many different techniques of information and communication technology. But it's a reality now, and people got to, willingly or unwillingly, they got to make use of all these things. So using technologies that have not been invented so far, this is going to be a challenge before the educated youth of today. And the third area, to solve problems that are not yet known. So in days to come, from our youth or people or employee in different sectors of economy, they are definitely going to face the challenges and they are going to face the problem which they would have never ever heard of. So the real challenge before today's educator and today's people who are getting education is they are going to be involved in research in careers which do not exist, and application or use of technologies which do not exist, and solving problems which they have never ever thought of, they have never ever come across. So this is what is going to be the scenario in days to come. Keeping all these things in view, our government of India, they have already announced education 2020, and whatever role the teacher has to play in days to come, they have to keep in mind this thing, education policy, provisions of education policy. Just to tell you, see, entire education policy is probably divided in 27 or 28 different sections. First 8 sections, they belong to school education system, and from section 9 or clause 9, the higher education provision with regard to higher education starts. Section 9 talks about creating quality education and quality university and colleges. Section 10 talks about institutional restructuring and consolidation. As you must have heard of, marginal institution which admit only 100, 200 students every year, they get merged with other and they got to be part of a bigger education system. So institutional restructuring and consolidation is going to take place. Then we government is now emphasizing on more this thing towards more holistic and multidisciplinary education. People who get into conventional this thing, BA, BSc, BCom, etc., they use 3-year degree. So if you get study for 3 years, you get that conventional degree. If you study, devote 1 more year, you get a holistic sort of degree. All that kind of changes, they are explained in section 11. Section 12 talks about creating optimal learning environment and providing support to students, particularly the needy students. Section 13 talks about motivated, energized and capable faculty, because education sector would improve, quality of education would improve provided you have motivated, energized and capable. Then section 14 talks about equity and inclusion in higher education. Equity basically from the point of view, there are people who can't afford education, there are some persons with disability, there are third gender issues, so but the education has to take everybody along. So that's why emphasis on equity and inclusion. So that's talked about in section 14. 15 talks about teacher education. There are changes in teacher education and duration of teacher education program is also undergoing changes now. Reimagining vocational education. Here, till recently, vocational education was something which used to be considered to be falling within the domain of Ministry of Labor and Employment. Now, vocational education is something which is expected to be imparted by all systems of education, whether they are engineering, diploma, degree, PG program, medical institution, hotel management, catering, or any kind. So all education system, they are expected to impart vocational education falling within their domain. And also, there's something known as gross enrollment ratio. Whether it is gross enrollment ratio, there's something known as say this thing. There are some institutions known as stand-alone institutions. Teacher need to be familiar with these stand-alone institutions. Yes, any of the participants, can you please respond?
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, gross enrollment ratio is the number of students that are enrolled in a school at several different grades, sir, levels.
Would you like to share your perception about what exactly is the gross enrollment ratio in higher education?
Sir, number of students that are admitted at diploma level, degree level, and PG level, like that.
In terms of percentage, I want to know
Sir,
what exactly is the gross enrollment ratio in higher education in India. And also, as a teacher, we need to know what exactly is the difference between higher education and education which doesn't fall within the purview of higher education. Can you differentiate between that? Okay, let me clarify these issues a bit. See, first of all, let's try to understand what exactly is the higher education. Any program which is of minimum 1 year in duration post 10+2. Okay, after 10+2, minimum 1 year duration. So that would be termed as higher education program. Any program which is of at least 3 year in duration post metric 3-year duration, that would also be known as part of higher education in India. Example, you see, when we talk of diploma level education in our country and diploma level level, basic entry qualification is metric. It's a different thing. People get into diploma program after 10 plus 2. Prescribed entry qualification is 10 this thing matriculation. And most of the diploma program, they are of 3-year duration. That's the precise reason a diploma program in India are considered to be the part of higher education. Diploma education is a higher education. But ITI education, where you find the ITI plus 2-year or ITI or 1 year, 8 pass plus 1 year or 2-year course, so they do not constitute the part of Indian higher education. But suppose having done 10 plus 2, you do 1 year certificate course from a university, that would be considered as higher education. So I have tried to differentiate between higher education and the education which doesn't fall within the purview of higher education. Number 2, stand-alone institution. Any of the participant, can you throw a little light on that? In our country, let me tell you, there are almost 50,000 institutions which are imparting higher education. Out of these 50, close to 10,000 institutes fall under the category of stand-alone institution. Would anyone of you like to share your view about stand-alone institutions? Stand-alone institutions are those institutions which are not affiliated to any university and they are not allowed to offer degree program. They would only offer diploma. And because polytechnics offer only diploma program, so they fall under the category of stand-alone. Similarly, find some of the institutions, they offer their own PGDM. In fact, till recently, even IIM, they used to offer PGDM. So all these PGDM, postgraduate diploma in management, because they are not offering any degree program, so they also fall under the category of standalone institutes. Now, the third concept I asked you was gross enrollment ratio.
So can I answer this?
Please, madam, go ahead.
Sir, gross enrollment ratio is somewhere around 27 to 29, in between.
Okay, talking about higher education system, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm talking about the higher education only. It is in between 27 to 29, and it indicates how many students are part of the higher education system in a given population.
Little bit, I would like to clarify here. It's like this thing. Suppose in the age group of 18 to 23, usually that is the type of, kind of age, people in this age group, they should be in higher education system.
Yes.
Okay. Suppose there's a total population of, say, 1,000 in this category, right? Or say 100 to make it still simpler. People in the age group of 18 to 23 are 100 in number. And out of these, you got to then find out how many of them are really having the benefit of undergoing education in higher education. So that number at present is around, as you very rightly pointed out, 27 to 29% or so. So out of 100, 29, close to 29% people, they are in higher education. Whereas when you compare it with other countries, developed countries like America, some other countries, you'll find, so their gross enrollment ratio may be 70, 80% or so. In some countries, it may even touch 90%. Now, Government of India has given itself a target of taking higher gross enrollment ratio from present 28-29% to 50% by 2035. That means after 11 years. How is it going to happen? Till 10th 5-year plan, which ended in 2007. So till 2007, we used to have gross enrollment ratio in higher education only in single digit. It's only after huge expansion of technical education, we have now achieved a figure of 29. Now, Government of India, so as to reach the level of 50%, what they have done is, under new education policy, they have clarified it under reimagining vocational education system. What they have done is, the pass out from vocational education system would also be considered part of this thing, higher education, for the purpose of calculating gross enrollment ratio. And as you know, there are so many 20,000 ITIs in our, and so many other skill courses. Okay, so if you add that number plus 4 crore people who are already in higher education system, so all this taken together, so that would perhaps help us in achieving the target of 50% gross enrollment ratio by 2035. So that is why reimagining this in vocational education is important. Section 17 talks about catalyzing quality academic research. Section 18 transforming regulatory system, which is already underway, and probably AICT and UGC would be replaced by Commission of Higher Education. Then Section 19 talks about effective governance at institute level. Section 20 about professional education. Section 21 lays emphasis on adult education. Then promotion of Indian languages, and then technology use and its integration. It has already started taking place thanks to Corona, which has really given impetus to this thing, application of information and communication technology in teaching, learning. Online and digital education has already started picking up. Then we have this thing, strengthening of Central Board of Central Advisory Board of Education, CAPE, which is nothing but a body wherein all education minister of different states, union territory, then all representative from different board, university, etc. So CAPE is a national level body usually chaired by education minister of the country. So strengthening of that, and so as to make finance available, of course, on loan basis, higher education financing agency that has been created, and financing is talked about in section 27. Section 27 talked about implementation. Okay, what are different milestones? So this is just in brief. So this is what we expect this thing from we can expect from higher education system. And now, if we have to bring some this thing suggested measures for bringing improvement in technical education system, what do we need to do? We definitely need to lay a lot of emphasis on research work. Unfortunately, research in most of the institutions, particularly the B grade and C grade institutions, research work occupies the backbench. So, and we got to lay more emphasis on research work. And you see, any discipline which lays much emphasis on research, it definitely flourishes. Examples are before us. Look to the Indian education, medical education system, or Indian management education system. These are two areas where you find, or pharmacy education. These are the areas where you find there's a lot of research work which is going on, and that's what is really keeping us, it keeps on making us forge ahead in these areas. Then introduction of different opportunities. You see, probably a mindset, change in mindset is required, and till now what was recently happening, people only used to think science stream is something which is better. People wanted their sons and daughters to go for science stream, but nowadays you find there are so many other disciplines, even singing, dancing, art, food, this thing, catering, so many other film industry, commerce and associated disciplines, okay, IT. So there are so many other opportunities, they need to be exploited, and we need to go beyond the conventional discipline. Then requirement of smart teacher. The conventional concept of teacher, probably, that need to be supplemented by inducting smart teacher, and these smart teachers are nothing but in some of the coaching institutions we find Khan Academy, or some other institution, Super 30, or so many other institutions are there. So where you have enterprising people, and these enterprising people, they are making use of their enterprising skill in so entrepreneurial teacher, they got to be inducted in education system. Then integrating technology trends in education, that of course is already being done, and we are definitely making extensive use of technology in teaching learning. Probably the days of total contact mode are gone. Now we got to have only the hybrid mode. Then eradication of reservation, I don't know if it can be done. It will definitely go a long way in really improving the technical education system in India. Emphasis on co-curricular activities. So in fact, one has to basically lay a lot of emphasis on co-curricular activity and understand the passion of student. If you can understand the passion of student and make that passion as profession for that, so if passion and profession can match, so then there could be wonders taking place. Then check on parental involvement. The mentality of this thing, the career of the student is going to be decided by the father or mother. We need to go beyond that. Here again, I would like to link it with passion. So try to understand, as a parent, try to understand what exactly is the passion of my son or daughter, and help be a facilitator in converting that passion into a profession. Then clarity on purpose of education. So purpose of education is not only getting into lucrative jobs. So that has to be understood. So teachers' role and responsibility in this scenario. First of all, opening this thing, put it in red. Just try to give meaning to it. And what it says, it reads like, people remember 20% of what they hear. That means if you are only lecturing, so the retention is going to be only 20%. People remember 20% of what they hear. 30%, it goes up to 30%. 30% of what they see, and 50% of what they hear and see, and 80% of what they hear, see, and do. So I think so this statement clarifies lot many things. So if it that means we need to go beyond only the lecturing method. So otherwise the benefit is going to be only 20%, and 30% of what they see. If they can see it with their eyes, so retention would further improve. And if they can see it also, and they can hear it also, then 50%. And nothing like this thing, you make them hear, you make them see, you make them them do, चाहे इसको आप internship कहें, चाहे इसको आप कुछ और नाम दे लें, right? But retention is much better when you make the student hear, see and do. Then now, full understanding of education policy. Suggestion, as because the my session says changing contours and role of professional. So as a teacher, your role is going to be, you got to have first of all full understanding of this thing, new education policy. Unfortunately, not all teachers in professional institutions are fully aware of education policy. Some of them, they may not have even read it fully. It's a document of just 59 pages. Please download it, okay? Have a soft copy or hard copy with you. Go through the provisions of new education policy. Try to internalize it. Try to understand the philosophy of new education policy. Inbuild high degree of flexibility in your teaching methods as changes are taking place in the world. I have already shared with you, integrating technology into your teaching, integrating maybe different approaches, or making it student centric. So all those things, they need to be done. Be a continuous learner. Teacher can never afford to be relaxing. So as a teacher, there's always new body of knowledge being created in your concerned discipline. Try to be aware of that, what is latest in your discipline, and for that matter, you got to be a continuous learner. Change from change over from teacher-centric approach to student-centric approach. Earlier, teacher-centric approach was lecture method, but if you can supplement it with case studies, project-based teaching, then experiential learning, and teacher becoming a facilitator rather than just delivering. So, particularly experiential learning. Try to understand the philosophy of experiential learning. You see, when you involve people in experiential learning, you create a situation. Maybe you give them a project, maybe you involve them in exercise or game or some behavioral exercise. Involve the students in that, generate data, and thereafter, having generated data, whatever learning takes place, this learning takes place based on what has happened right there and then. Okay, so learning takes place based on that, and that's the beauty of experiential learning. And because this is something which the student experience, and if you can relate it with the basic concept, then the retention is going to be much higher for a much longer period. Then as a teacher, you got to be doing a lot of published work, like in American university, you got to publish at least 2 good paper every year, otherwise you are thrown out of the job, or maybe you won't get increment. So probably that kind of things are going to happen in India as well. Mobilizing sponsored research and development project, guiding PhD and undertaking testing and consultancy services, so as to supplement the resources of the institute, and so as to have even extra earning for yourself. Go to IIT and NIT, you find people earning maybe equal to their salaries, sometime even many a time more than their salary. IIT professors are supposed to be earning crores of rupees by way of consultancy and test, and by way of participating in so many committees. Unfortunately, in some of the educational institutions, so even people at the top, they don't encourage this thing, research and development, and rather than becoming a facilitator, you become a hindrance as head of the institution. पता चल गया कि हाँ, so and so is providing consultancy, take action against that person. That should not. Rather, you should feel proud कि अगर आपका कोई faculty member है, this person is going and providing consultancy or helping institutions in improving their productivity. So that need to be encouraged. Then deep understanding of NBA and NAC requirement, and this thing, performing the role accordingly. I think in days to come, every institution will have to go for NBA and NAC accreditation. To start with, maybe you try only for NAC, you get your courses approved. I would consider this thing, NBA and NAC, as just like a tree and root. So NBA accreditation is nothing but it acts as roots, and NAC is a huge sort of tree, so which has deep root within. Okay, so if you have gone for NBA, going to be much easier for you to get NAC accreditation. Then this thing, practice of online teaching, people have already started doing that. Most of the teachers are involved in online teaching nowadays. Implementation of hybrid mode of education, this also is being practiced almost across the country now, even in schools. Operationalizing of academic bank of credit would be required as per the need of the new education policy, and become a role model and motivate and inspire students through innovative and creative teaching method. As a teacher, so a teacher, as a teacher, you should become a role model for the students. If you can do that, you would be leaving everlasting impression on this. So these are some of the suggestions. Yes, madam.
Sir,
yes.
I have one question here. In the second point, you have said that on the consultancy projects, means what kind of consultancy projects I'm little bit confused on this, but means how being into education, how this consultancy projects can be worked out, or how I can work out on the consultancy part. Because
Madam,
many
what
times
I would suggest to you is, wherever you are located, first of all, be fully aware of what are different industries, service organizations, major government department existing in your vicinity. Okay? Let's assume there are some few corporates in your vicinity. Now, catch hold of their annual report. And when you go through their annual report, you need not go through the entire report. There's a dedicated section which is titled as challenges faced by the. Now, if you refer to those challenges faced, these challenges may be in production, challenges may be in maybe R&D, product development, design related, challenges may be pertaining to sale, challenges may be pertaining to manpower. There are variety of challenges which industry face. So I would suggest to go through this challenges section very thoroughly, and if you have gone through some 10-15 such like corpo reports, you will have many ideas, or maybe you can just visit the industry, have interaction over there, and thereafter I would suggest you to make a sort of problem bank at your institute level, and out of those problems then you got to match your expertise. After all, you can't solve all their problems.
Correct.
So but maybe some of the problem you can definitely solve. Let me give you one specific example here. Once I was conducting STC at Jodhpur. There's a company called Kansra Bearing. I had 20 STC participants. I took them for a visit to Kansra Bearing at Jodhpur. So we had a meeting with the proprietor. They used to manufacture bearing, and whatever number of bearing they were producing. So before packing, they used to dip the bearing in oil, and thereafter, so as to make it smooth. Thereafter, they used to, this thing, clean it with cotton और रैक ओके, तो वो ऑयल सोक कर लेते थे, और उसके बाद में प्रॉब्लम वाज कि हाउ डू यू डिस्पोज ऑफ दैट. तो वो क्या करते थे कि रात को उसमें आग लगा देते थे, एंड एज ए रिजल्ट व्हाट हैपेंड, वन डे पोल्यूशन कंट्रोल पीपल केम एंड दे हैड पुट ए हेवी फाइन. हो गया, क्वाइट ए हेफ्टी फाइन. सो दिस प्रोप्राइटर देन टोल्ड, ही वाज इंटरेक्टिंग विद अस, यू सी माय प्रॉब्लम इज, नंबर वन, व्हेन आई मेक यूज ऑफ कॉटन, आई एम मेकिंग यूज ऑफ नेचुरल फाइबर जस्ट टू सोक दैट ऑयल, वेस्ट ऑयल. नंबर वन अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर द academician and researcher is, can you somehow evolve a mechanism wherein I regain the natural fiber as well as I can segregate oil, I can segregate cotton. That is one. Secondly, how do I solve, can you develop a model for me so as to have a workable solution for, and I don't get stuck with this thing, pollution control. बोलता है मुझे कोई भी, I am prepared to give any amount of money provided my problem is. So this sort of thing. Here in vicinity of Chandigarh, we had a problem with this thing, steel strips and wheels. There used to be higher rate of accident in first hour of the shift. Morning में 8 बजे shift शुरू होगी, so there would be some accident, more accident in that. So they came to us, नाइटर चंडीगढ़, ये हमारी समस्या है. एक और प्रॉब्लम मैं बताता हूँ. वी हैव दिस अर्लियर स्वराज ट्रैक्टर व्हिच इज नाउ महिंद्रा. सो फाउंड्री सेक्शन पीपल, दे कॉन्टेक्टेड अस. मेरे पास में फोन आया, कहते हम जब फोर्जिंग वो करते हैं ना, फाउंड्री में वो कास्टिंग करते हैं, कास्टिंग के बाद ग्राइंडिंग करते हैं, तो देयर आर सम बबल्स इन दैट, और बबल्स होने से फिर प्रॉब्लम आ जाती है. जब ग्राइंड करेंगे तो गंदा लगेगा ना. कहते प्लीज ऑर्गेनाइज, either take it as a consultancy project or suggest us some solution. I told them I am not a mechanical engineer, but our institute would definitely find a solution for this. So we referred the problem to our mechanical engineering department. They solved it, and ultimately they were satisfied. We solved many problem of Eicher tractor. We solved many problem of Thapar group. We conducted total quality management. And civil engineering department itself at NITER Chandigarh earns a consultancy of at least 2 to 3 crore rupees every year. Just 2-3%. So when you are open to learning and little creative in finding out solutions, and you keep on studying continuously, you can definitely carve out opportunity for yourself. And you have to sell your expertise. So any other question? Otherwise, so far as my presentation is concerned, presentation is over. And now the house is open for discussion.
Sir, I'm Dr. Sumikua from Raipur, Chhattisgarh. I'm in charge examination when you were talking about the consultancy. So we do conduct like generating IRG and consultancy, like not consultancy exactly, but we do conduct skill tests for different government organizations.
Okay.
So because I belong to a humanities department, so no industries are involved, but definitely we do conduct at least 2 to 3 government organization examination, and we generate money, and our image is also created in the area. So this is one thing we have been doing.
You see, there could be training consultancy also.
So we are doing like this.
Training consultancy, you can conduct so many management program, executive development program, tie up with the industry around. You can conduct workshops, seminars, etc. We at NITER Chandigarh, we have conducted many such. Even when I was here as full-time faculty, we used to bid for this thing. There was a program of Government of India, modernization and rehabilitation of old Sikh unit. Our Department of Entrepreneurship, so many people, consultants were sending their quotes. So we also quoted for it. And fortunately, it was in 1998. So we got 12 projects from DIC Chandigarh. 12 unit ko jo hai, we have to conduct a modernization and rehabilitation study and prepare a detailed project report, which is bankable, bank feasibility report. So 12 projects we conducted and 12 of, I think out of 12, 11 were finance. Many of them are doing well. So, और उसमें क्या होता है कि like once you have done a good job in industry, so then that industry becomes by word of mouth they will spread the message around. They'll help you in getting more consultants. So once you are determined, you have expertise, you have confidence of delivering, you can definitely, and if you can create, getting first order is the most. If you can get an order and satisfy your client, come up to their satisfaction, they would definitely refer it to others. Otherwise, industry वाले अगर आप वहाँ जाएं, वो कहते हैं कि no free lunches, but solve our problem, you'll be paid for it. That's what I have experienced at least. We got so many, even World Bank, they came out. There was a massive 4,000 crores worth of technical education financing project, 1992. तो वो प्रोजेक्ट इंप्लीमेंट किया गया 4,000 crore rupees were pumped into technical education system in India. So World Bank wanted to get the impact assessment study conduct. So that impact assessment studied, we were one of the bidders and the 4 NITERs joined hand together. We charged 1.25 crore rupees in 1992 और country wide study conduct करके उनको दिया. So there could be consultancy, there could be training program, there could be design related, there could be product improvement related or workshop, seminar, conferences. Tremendous scope for this. Yes, any other question? Well, ladies and gentlemen, in case there are no more questions, then it's time to close the session.